Why is it so difficult for rookies to get acclimated to playing with Aaron Rodgers? Kalyn Kahler wrote a piece in The Athletic about at least one reason why it can be so tough. We talked to her on a bonus edition of Locked On Packers.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook, subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the number one Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. As I mentioned, Kalyn Kahler on the show today from The Athletic. She wrote a piece that got a lot of play about the receivers, the rookie receivers, and what it's like, particularly as it relates to Aaron Rodgers' hand signals. That this was the lens through which she told the story. I think it's a really interesting story. I think it's a great anecdote that helps us understand all of the information that it is required to play receiver in Green Bay and why it's taken Christian Watson a little while. Why even Romeo Doubs, for as talented as we think he is, for as much as Aaron Rodgers loves him, that it has been a little bumpy. Of course, the injury has been a part of that too. So she offers some great insight. And so we'll get to that conversation in just a second. Before we do, today's episode brought to you by our friends at Tommy John. I mentioned that my wife put these on her Christmas gift list after I raved about mine. She bought some and loved them so much she wanted more. I don't know how I can give a better endorsement of this product than that. I got some. I liked them so much that she got some. She liked them so much she wanted more. And guess what? She's getting more. Don't tell her. She might be close enough to hear me. Don't tell her. Hurry to Tommy John's Wrap It Up sale and you can get 30% off everything plus free shipping at TommyJohn.com/locked on. Order now so your gifts arrive by the holidays. 30% off plus free shipping at TommyJohn.com/locked on. Joining me now from The Athletic, Kalyn Kahler. The article is called Signal Meetings and Aaron Rodgers' Little Death Stare, What It's Like for Packers Rookie Receivers. Kalyn, this is a story that I think people hooked onto one or two quotes and thought it was about something that, frankly, I don't think it's about, but that's why I wanted to talk to you about it. So let's start at the very beginning. Why did you set out to write this story? What was the original thread for this?
So the original thread was the performance of the rookie wide receivers through I would say the first, 10 weeks of the season? Was Dallas week 10? The first 10 weeks of the season. Yes, there were injuries that you could blame things on, but it stood out. Two things stood out to me. One, their lack of production and the very obvious communication issues and drops. And I mean, literally the season started with that massive, first play of the season, massive drop. So honestly, from literally the first play of the season, I was like, interesting. I'm going to keep an eye on this because, obviously week one, first play. Okay, let's see what happens, but didn't get better for a while. And I wanted to know why. And then also taking into account just the lack of production in general from rookies in that offense, and always kind of wondering why that was, and seeing that this year, when you just look at how much Rodgers had been trying, or LaFleur had been trying to get Watson and Doubs involved in the offense, it was a lot more than we had seen from previous Packers offenses. Like, they've just never had to rely on the rookie wide receivers in that way. So those were all the things that kind of combined to make me want to look into this. So I started reporting it before that. It might have been the week of right after that Dallas game or right before it, somewhere around that Dallas game. And then I was like, oh shit. I was like, of course, now Christian Watson is going to start playing well, awesome. But
that's the lead of the story. The very first line of the story is Christian Watson almost ruined the story.
I mean, I wanted to be upfront about it because one of my editors was like, I don't know that any of this is relevant anymore. And I was like, it definitely is relevant, but it's just going to have to be packaged a little bit differently and we need to admit that Christian Watson is really good and he's playing well now. But why wasn't he playing well earlier? I mean, there aren't that many receivers that are like a Justin Jefferson who can just hit the ground running and be great, once you decide to start playing him. Not everybody's that's a very rare player, but so like all of those things combined. And I was like, this is still interesting to me because what I was hearing from the rookies that I was talking to, like Amari Rodgers, like Kalyn Hill, because I literally called those guys the day after they were released. I think they were released the same day, or like one after another, something like that. I called both of them the day after because I was like, okay, they're not there anymore. So now maybe they'll have more to say, and they definitely have more time to be speaking to me. So I called both of them the day after they were released, and just kind of some of the details that they said about particularly the signal meetings is what really fascinated me. And actually I had heard about that aspect of the offense about a couple months ago from another player who I was doing a completely different story on, who had spent time in Green Bay last season. And he said something to me about how difficult it was to learn the Packers offense because nobody teaches you certain things. And this player entered mid-season there. So, he was kind of really coming in cold and was like trying to like learn all these signals and get up to date and up to speed. And the quote from Sammy Watkins where he was like, if you're not 100% up to speed, like you are going to fail in this offense. So this other player had told me about the signals, and I just kind of made a mental note. That was like at some point in October, and I made like a mental note of that and was like, oh, that was really interesting. Like maybe that's why it's so hard to be a rookie in this offense. And so then I started talking to all these recent young players who had been there in that offense, like Kalyn Hill and Amari Rodgers and a couple of practice squad guys, a tight end and a receiver there. And they all were like, yeah, the signals were really difficult. Like none of them.
Can we just back up a second?
Sorry.
Just because if you haven't read the piece, the signal part of this is like the central idea. And I think this is ultimately what the story really is about, like taking this one example of why it is so hard to be a rookie with Aaron Rodgers, because there's so much to learn. And part of the reason is Sammy Watkins has been in the league almost a decade, and he's like, yeah, I still don't know like all of the things. So can you just explain the signal meeting part of this for people who haven't read the piece? Go read the piece on The Athletic, but just for the purposes of our discussion, so people aren't going like, what is she talking about?
Yeah, sorry, I got off on like a
no, it's okay. You were rolling. I liked
it. So the crux of this whole story is, why is it hard to be a rookie in this offense? So one of the reasons it's hard is because so anyone who's watched Aaron Rodgers, you guys have all seen him do these things at the line of scrimmage, right before a play. He does this many times per game. It's not every play. Like when I was at Bears Packers, their last game, I was specifically just watching Rodgers to see how often he would do it. And I didn't actually like take a tally of, okay, this many snaps out of this many is what he did. But like, it was regularly. I would say it was like every third or fourth play.
Yeah, that seems right to me, just anecdotally.
Yeah. So he'll do stuff like the one finger swirl, arm behind the back, thumb pointed down. There's one that the receivers do where they go like this and they hit their wrist, which I don't know what that means. Hitch. I did learn a hitch and a stick. Hitch is thumbs up, stick is thumbs down. So Rodgers is probably going to have to change those ones. Sorry, Aaron, he may have to update those signals. Anyway, so he has this vast array of hand signals that he will do, and that's changing a route. It could signal a play concept. It could signal something he's seeing in the defense. It's changing something on the fly. So there's about 30 of those that he has and expects his receivers to know. And they don't teach them. I've learned all of this from my conversations with the players who had been there. And I was told that they don't really teach them until the regular season begins because they're making a bunch of cuts during camp. Right. They don't really want to give that information away too soon to guys who are going to go within the division. And guys are cut all the time. So like the meaning of his signals is definitely getting out, but they are trying to kind of keep it contained as long as they can. So once the season begins, they'll start introducing these signals, but they're never officially taught to the younger players. Like
I love this. I cannot believe this is the case, but I love it. Go ahead.
Yeah, they don't like sit down. As far as what I heard from multiple players, right? They're not sitting down and being like, all right, guys, this is this, this is this. here's what this means. Like,
you just got to figure it out.
Yeah. And like, I would think there would be like a film cut up being like, okay, here's Rodgers doing all these different things. And now you can see what changed, but there isn't a cut up. Like, obviously if you're watching film, you can see him do the signal and then you can see what happens, but there isn't like a cut up, like a teach tape. There's no teach tape for this. You can't search it in the iPad for the playbook. It's not written down anywhere. Jordan Love, I was talking to him after the Bears game and he was like, oh yeah, it's just in our brains. So the rookies, it was such a great quote. I was like, Jordan, that was amazing. So, and then he said, he's really the only one who would ever even write it down. And he's not writing down the actual signal. He's writing down the call. He's writing down the word associated with the signal. So he'll write a list of those. And he's like, it's probably, he described it as 3 columns on a sheet of paper. So 30 kind of seems right because it'd be like maybe 10, 10, and 10. But that's really the only like written record of this stuff. And he said, that's not for the receivers. That's only for the quarterbacks. And then
the receivers don't get it.
Right. And then he even said, especially not the young ones, which it's like, what? Okay. So yeah. And the funny thing is, and that's why I think everyone's overreacting a little bit on Twitter to some of this story is the guys that I talked to, they were all on the record. And I don't think none of them asked to go off the record because they just thought this was like normal. And they think like no one was like saying, oh, how dare Aaron have all these signals and how dare he call us up and quiz us? Like some of them were like, yeah, it was scary. Like we didn't look forward to it. Like it was, it sucked, but like nobody was like, this really was terrible for my mental health and my well-being and my.
You gave EQ the chance to say that too. You said how is it different from Chicago? He could have said like, yeah, this is much easier, and he didn't.
Right. So like they all, and that's kind of what's interesting to me is they just thought this is just how it is. Like nobody was like, how this is terrible. It was just like how it is. But anyways, that is a very difficult part because this is something they're expected to know, but they have to kind of go out of their way to know it. And the veterans are helpful. They're not like turning a cold shoulder and being like, I will not teach you the signals. Like Randall is very helpful. All of the Alan Lazard is very helpful. All, MVS when he was there, like all of the guys who had been in it will help the rookies, but it is on the rookies to ask for that help and to ask, okay, can you review this with me? Can we go over this? Yeah. So that is a really interesting part. And I just think it speaks to a larger, just kind of like culture there of like, we will help you, but you need to like figure it out. And this, and you brought up EQ. And I think that was another sort of chicken or the egg question that I had in this story that I asked a lot of different people. EQ is now in Chicago with Justin Fields, who is in his 2nd season. So he's a very young quarterback. And I asked EQ, like, what is the difference between playing with Rodgers, who at the time when he was there was a veteran, is even more of a veteran now. I asked him what the difference was. And he said, with Justin, he's able to actually have a conversation about the offense. And, do we like this route? Because Justin is also like learning the route. So like EQ was basically saying his voice, he has more of a voice in Chicago. And then I followed up and said, okay, is that a better learning environment for a young receiver? Because it is an interesting question. Like, what's better for a rookie receiver? Is it better to be told exactly what you're supposed to do to a T? And okay, this is the exact thing that I need you to do. Or is it better to go somewhere where your quarterback is more open and flexible and willing to also work with you? And so EQ was like, no, it doesn't matter. Like, it's not about, he wouldn't say it was a better learning environment because he was like, doesn't matter. Like, whoever your quarterback is, if they're around for 10 or 15 years, like, or 5 years, like, you have to do what they want you to do to get the ball. So he's like, It really doesn't matter. And Randall Cobb had like the same answer. I didn't put this in the story, but I asked him the same question. He was like, well, do you want to get the ball? Like, do you want the ball? Because he's like, when I went to Houston, when I went to Dallas, I had to learn how to play with 2 new quarterbacks. So it's kind of an interesting question, but nobody would actually say like, no, it's better for a rookie to be with a younger quarterback. Like nobody would say that.
And remember too, this is the same Equinemi St. Brown, who a couple of years ago was going, well, Aaron Rodgers is telling me one thing and the OC is telling me another thing about this route. And if I want the ball, I got to do what Aaron says. So I have to sort of parse all this stuff. Like ultimately, this is about what the quarterback wants. And that makes it, I think it can make it difficult at times. All right, we're going to get to more with Kalyn in just a second. But before we do, this holiday season, find what you love at Total Wine & More. With so many great bottles to choose from, it's easy to find a new favorite Cabernet or Chardonnay or the perfect gift for everyone on your list with some help from a friendly guide at Total Wine. And with the confidence of knowing you found something special for the lowest price. Love what you find. Find what you love. Only at Total Wine & More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Drink responsibly and be 21. Also, thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. For your next listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. The biggest stories in sports. All the topics you need to hit. I hit them on Locked On Sports Today. Come check it out. There's like a value judgment in this. I think people think that you went in with a value judgment in all of this. And I don't know. I personally did not read it that way.
No.
But can you just sort of explain, like, once you came out of this, did you come out of it feeling like this is a totally fine way for this to be handled? Or like, maybe that could be like, how did you come out of it feeling like, in terms of process, Green Bay is handling this?
I think there's definitely ways they could improve, specifically by maybe teaching things, maybe by like actually teaching the signals and being a little bit more open with that information. That's probably an easy step. I don't know that I didn't really come to any conclusion. And that's why this story was like a little bit difficult for me to like wrap my brain around, because I was like, okay, wait, now Christian Watson is playing well. What does any of this mean? Does any of this mean anything? But as I kind of said in my first answer, like, it's still true that until this season, because Devontae Adams left and because Allen Lazard was kind of injured and also is not really a number one receiver, they never had to involve the rookies. So now that they have had to involve the rookies, we're seeing how hard it is sort of play out in front of our eyes in a way that we haven't really seen before. And Randall had a good quote about that. He was like, he thought he played 10 snaps a game, but then I looked it up and it was like 6. So he was like, yeah, I played like 6 snaps a game and he had 25 catches as a
When
rookie.
I read that, I thought there's no way that can be true, because you remember it being a lot more because he's been in our lives for forever. He's been in the NFL now for 11 years. So just like, yeah, Randall Cobb's always, but no, 7, like, I think it's, the number is something like 6.7 snaps, right?
It's really low. And he was like, that's because I was not ready. Like, I was not, he's like, Aaron was still, because I asked him, was Aaron as detailed in your rookie year, which was Aaron's 4th year as a starter? I was like, was he as detailed as he is now? And he was like, oh yeah. And that's why I didn't play. So there's definitely something here about I think the truth of the matter is it is much harder to be a rookie with a veteran quarterback. I think if you did this story with Tom Brady, it would probably be exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was debating with an editor, like, okay, has there been an example of like a really, like, is there an example of a veteran elite quarterback who was really instrumental for a rookie receiver? Like, I don't know. And that's also subjective because some guys have injuries. It's honestly like an impossible thing to like pull a stat about and like compare. But I do think the truth is it is a lot harder to be a rookie wide receiver with Aaron Rodgers than it is with Justin Fields or Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert. You know what I mean? Because those guys are flexible. And I do think if you look at Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson, yes, Justin Jefferson is an elite, rare specimen. But I think Kirk is also, from everything I've heard about him, he's still a veteran, but I think he's a little bit more open. I mean, he's not at the level of Aaron Rodgers where people are like, oh, Kirk Cousins is the greatest quarterback of all time. And like, he has a specific process and everything has to be this way. And like, Kirk is not that guy. So I think if you ask Justin Jefferson, which I didn't interview him for this story, but I think if you were to go ask Justin Jefferson, he'd probably be open about like the process with Kirk, and like this would be an interesting thing to ask him about, of like how was your working relationship with Kirk? Like, did he tell you exactly how he wanted you to do things, or were you able to, work with him? Was there like a back and forth dialogue? That would be really interesting. But I think the main point is that it's hard to be with a veteran who is very set in their ways and has seen a lot of things and is experienced and wants things done the way that they want things done. Like, that's always going to be harder than being paired with a younger quarterback who is still in the learning process and is more open to that stuff.
Well, it sounds like you have a great next story idea. I'm
gonna have to go get Justin Jefferson. Yeah. Well, when the Vikings, when the Vikings come to Chicago, I know what my locker room assignment is now. I think that's in. It might be the last game of the season. I think it is.
I'm racking my brain trying to think of an elite quarterback that had that moment.
Phillip Rivers and Keenan Allen.
Yeah.
Drew Brees and Michael Thomas.
If you kind of want to push the boundaries of great, like he's an all-time great, I guess. I'm trying to think of like what Reggie Wayne looked like year one in Indianapolis. Like that might be one of those. It's tough. Also, a lot of these guys haven't had also those super elite guys like Aaron Rodgers until Devontae Adams. Didn't really have a super elite receiver. Tom Brady, when he got one, Randy Moss, he was already established in the league. So they're just like, it's kind of hard to find those guys who are veterans with that premier player, mostly because if you have a great quarterback,
you're
not picking in the top 15 to get one of those really good receivers. You're not
in the position to draft Justin Jefferson. Yeah. So that's why it's a chicken or the egg dilemma.
Yeah.
That we're like, it's just worth chatting about, but we're never really going to have like a definitive answer.
I think guys come in more ready than ever to play.
Yeah.
And so that helps. And maybe we will start to see it more. But until then, we'll have to keep asking these questions, and maybe Aaron Rodgers will get some more rookies next year to play with, and we'll have more data points to try and figure this all out. Kalyn, thank you for writing the piece, and thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Peter.
All right, thanks to Kalyn for joining the show. Great to talk to her. It was a really interesting story. She talked to a ton of people: Romeo Doubs, Equinemius St. Brown, Randall Cobb, Chris Blair, and it was a lot. And I think it was an exhaustive piece. And I know that people have sort of latched on to one quote from Amari Rodgers about Aaron Rodgers not being like super nice to him or whatever. That's not what the story is about. I encourage you to go read the story because it's just not what it's about. It's just not. So just go read it, please. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have her on was to explain the process behind it and what she found and what it means. And so I think we got a chance to do that. We'll be back Monday. Like I said, we'll have a little bit of the show. It's going to be dedicated to playoff previews. It's going to be a short episode Monday. So we'll make it easy. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you'll find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to come hang out with us live on our YouTube page, you can do that. Locked On Packers YouTube to stay. Locked On Packers.